Hey guys, in response to some unfortunate events that have happened on social media in some online pagan communities that I'm a part of, and some hard conversations that we've had to have in those communities, I thought it would be helpful to make a little video about the appropriation of Norse symbols and religious elements by white supremacist and white nationalist groups. I have actually prepared a little PowerPoint presentation for you guys. We're going to go through a little bit of the history, why this is a problem, why these groups are so attracted to the Norse system, how you can recognize these groups and these harmful people in your communities, and what you can do to kind of push back and keep heathenry and Norse paganism safe and accessible and affirming for all people. Now, I do want to make a small disclaimer. I am including photos and pictures of Nazi symbols in this video, including some authentic Nazi propaganda from World War II. I am including this for educational purposes only so that you know what to look out for and what symbols to avoid. But if that's something that is going to make you uncomfortable, please do be aware that those images will be in this video. So to start off, I want to talk about this dude from the US Capitol Riots on January 6, 2021. I have made a decision not to show his face or the faces of any of the other people who were at the Capitol building on January 6th. And I've made that decision because these people do not need a platform. They do not need their names to be remembered. They do not need any more of an audience than they already have, which is also why I have not included this man's actual name in this video. Just so we're clear. But you probably remember seeing this guy in the news. He goes by the QAnon shaman, or at least that's the name that the media sort of assigned to him in the news cycle. And he was part of the assault on the US Capitol on January 6, 2021, which we know was led by Donald Trump supporters, and we know that it was an attempt to overturn the 2020 election results. And that attack killed 5 people and injured over 140 others. So this is serious stuff. This is domestic terrorism. And as you can see in this picture, this man has tattoos and is wearing other visual signifiers that mark him as a white nationalist, probably with Nazi leanings, although we'll talk more about those categories later. So these are the 3 symbols that the QAnon shaman has tattooed on him in those photos. And these are also common symbols of Norse paganism, especially Yggdrasil and Mjolnir. I have an Yggdrasil tattoo myself. I have a Mjolnir necklace. But what really tips us off that this man is a white supremacist is the Valknut. This is an obscure symbol that appears in some places in Old Norse art, usually associated with Odin, but we don't really know what it means. And unfortunately, the main way it's used in modern times is as a visual signifier by quote unquote Viking white supremacist groups. So I think it's important for us to keep in mind the original context of these symbols. And as you can see, the Old Norse people did not look like what we think of today. They were not Chris Hemsworth in a blonde wig. They were not these blonde, blue-eyed, hyper-masculine warrior people. That's just not an accurate depiction of their culture. A DNA study published last year found that the Old Norse were extremely ethnically diverse, and it also found that they were significantly darker in their hair and skin than modern Scandinavians, which I think is very interesting. They had a trade network that stretched from Asia to Africa. They even visited North America, and they often mingled and mixed and married into the cultures they encountered. So there would have been a lot of mixed race people in Old Norse culture. I think it's interesting to note that they had a special admiration for Muslim Arabic culture, and that there's evidence that some of them may have converted to Islam. We've found a lot of Arabic and specifically Muslim grave goods in Scandinavian graves from around the Viking Age, so it's very possible that some of them were Muslim. So you may be wondering how we got from this very diverse, very metropolitan almost group of people to this idea of an all-white warrior race. And the answer, unfortunately, is literally Nazi propaganda. So in the 19th century, a man named Houston Stuart Chamberlain introduced the idea of the Aryan race. This is where we see the origin of the idea that there is a race of people who are superior to other people and that they are Aryan. And I just want to remind everybody that the actual Aryan Peninsula is in India, but Chamberlain believed that Aryans were white people, which is an idea that would later get picked up by the Nazi Party. And Chamberlain also believed that of these Aryan races, Nordic people were superior. They were the most Aryan it was possible to be. Not only is this 100% false, but it was actually discredited within years of being published. This was proved false very quickly. But the Nazi Party took these ideas and ran with them because these ideas supported their political agenda. And as you can see, this is a genuine piece of Nazi propaganda that makes a direct comparison between SS soldiers and the Vikings, the Norsemen. And after World War II, because Nazis were allowed to integrate into other countries, particularly the United States, they were able to spread this idea of the Aryan Norsemen throughout mainstream Western culture. And Norse symbolism is everywhere in Nazism. They really latched onto this idea and to the aesthetics of Norse culture. You can see here that the SS logo is the Sowilo rune from Elder Futhark, which is still something that's used by modern neo-pagans in their practice. So back to this man from the Capitol Riots. This combination of tattoos tips us off to the fact that this is a white nationalist. This man is wearing white nationalist symbols on his person, which is helpful for us because it makes it very unambiguous what he's doing and why he is attempting a coup in the United States. Like I mentioned earlier, Yggdrasil and Mjolnir on their own are not necessarily white supremacist symbols, but the Valknut is definitely a red flag. It's very, very commonly used by white nationalists, and it doesn't have a strong religious meaning outside of that. And all of this is in line with this man's online persona, where he openly supported the far right and defended the QAnon conspiracy theory, which I'm not even going to get into today. So you may be wondering what this has to do with paganism. And unfortunately, the Nazi appropriation of Old Norse culture, or this romanticized, fictional, ethno-nationalist version of it that they had created, did not stop with symbols and visuals. While the man at the Capitol siege identifies as Christian, and as far as I could tell, every person who was there either identified as Christian or non-religious. It is true that neo-Nazis and white supremacists have a presence in many pagan spaces, whether the rest of us want them there and want to acknowledge them or not. And this is not just a problem with heathenry. I would argue that their presence is the most obvious in heathen groups, but these people have infiltrated pagan spaces across the board. And many of the sources that were used by the Nazis to justify their actions are still used as foundational texts by modern pagans, including Wiccans, Azatror, heathens, Norse pagans, and other groups, even though these texts have been largely proven false. So, for example, I want to talk about Easter, and specifically the way we talk about Easter in pagan spaces. This is Easter, or Ostara, who is supposedly a Germanic springtime goddess. Now, Easter is attested to in exactly one place, which is Bede's The Reckoning of Time. And I personally have some issues with that source because it also contains prophecies of the second coming of Jesus Christ and Christian doomsday prophecies about the Antichrist and Judgment Day. So it is not a pagan source, and I also don't think it's necessarily the most reliable source because Bede is clearly not concerned with a factual, non-biased account of history. Easter is a figure who's become very popular with modern pagans, though. Gerald Gardner, the founder of Wicca, really latched on to the idea that Easter was a Christianized pagan festival, and Wiccans today still celebrate Ostara on the spring equinox, which is named after this goddess. And she's also become very popular with heathen groups and, unfortunately, with white supremacists because of her quote-unquote Germanic roots. And I want to make clear that I am not saying that this goddess isn't real. I'm not saying that people can't have real religious, spiritual experiences of Easter or Ostara or another similar figure, but I am arguing that there's not really enough historic evidence for us to say that Easter is based on a pagan holiday. And when we claim that Easter is a Christianization of a Germanic festival, not only are we basing that claim on very limited and very sketchy sources, but we're overwriting the very obvious and easily traceable roots of Easter in Jewish celebrations. Easter is based on the Jewish celebration of Pesach or Passover. And we know that that's mentioned explicitly in the Bible in connection with Easter. It's something that we can trace through history and anthropology, and it makes sense because Christianity began as a reform movement within Judaism. And this erasure of the contributions of Jewish people and the Jewishness of Christianity ties into white supremacist goals of devaluing the contributions of people of color and erasing them from mainstream culture, including religion. And I know that it's up for debate whether Jewish people are people of color, but it's important to remember that as far as white supremacists are concerned, they are other. They are not part of the group that these people consider white. And when we want to look at modern white nationalist Norse pagans, we have to go back to Nazi Germany and specifically to the Volkisch Movement, which was part of this effort to remove Jewish people and other people of color from mainstream religion and culture. The Volkisch Movement was a German ethno-nationalist movement that began in the 1800s and continued into the Nazi era. This movement included a reconstruction of a highly fictionized ethno-nationalist version of a pan-Germanic past, which was not really a thing. including either Germanizing Christianity by erasing its Jewish roots or rejecting Christianity entirely in favor of pre-Christian Germanic paganism. So we really have seen this Volkisch mindset carry on into the present day and into our current heathen communities. And here are some of the main red flags that you can look out for that can tip you off to someone having white nationalist leanings. They may self-identify with words like Volkisch, Folkish, or Odinist. They may use terms like ethno-pagan or ethnic pagan. No form of paganism is tied to any one ethnicity. Anyone who says otherwise has an agenda. They may have a strict us versus them mentality with either indifference or active hatred for those outside their in-group. They have a fear that the in-group is in decline due to foreign or alien influences. They have a need for an ethnically and philosophically pure community by consent if possible, but by violence if necessary. They're willing to violently push others out of the community if they don't fit their idea. They believe in the beauty of violence when devoted to the in-group's success or the beauty of violence in general. They believe in the right of their in-group to dominate others without restraint, often based on religious or pseudoscientific belief that the in-group has a racial superiority to other ethnicities. They often, but not always, and we'll talk about that later, uphold the authority of a male leader whose will supersedes conventional reason. It doesn't matter if the leader is wrong or if science disagrees with him. What he says is law in the group. And we see this with Donald Trump and with his followers. These are some common visual symbols that can serve as red flags for someone being Volkisch or white nationalist in their political agenda. This is the black sun, which is a lesser-known Nazi symbol. This is the Odal or Othala rune, which is a modified rune from the Elder Futhark. This is the Wolfsangel, which is sometimes shown on its side like this, or sometimes upright like this, and is often incorporated into other symbols or logos. And this is something called the life rune. All of these are symbols that were used by the Nazi Party and that continue to be used today by white nationalists. And Volkisch groups may also use the Valknut or the Sowilo rune, like we looked at earlier, or they may combine these symbols with less obviously Nazi-related Norse imagery. They've gotten very clever about incorporating these into other, more innocent designs. And the white nationalist problem within paganism is not just Nazis, because a Nazi is a very specific kind of white nationalist. The modern white supremacist movement has splintered since the fall of the Nazi Party into several subgroups, spreading into the alt-right movement and various other white nationalist movements that kind of latch on to existing political philosophies as it suits their needs. Modern white supremacist pagans are influenced very heavily by the philosophies of individualism and tribalism. So the idea that the individual matters more than other people, or that your tribe, your group of people matters more than people outside your group. And because of this, they may be more likely to identify as libertarian than fascist, but that doesn't mean that they're not a white supremacist, and it doesn't make them any less dangerous than someone who's openly identifying as a neo-Nazi. But there are some things you can do to avoid white supremacists, and that's what I want to talk about now. First, look for groups with a clear non-discrimination statement that condemns discrimination on the basis of race, gender, sexuality, and national origin. This is the single best way to know if a group is sympathetic to white supremacists. If they don't have a non-discrimination statement, they are not worth your time and they may be dangerous. Second, look for authors and teachers who reference reputable modern archaeologists and scholars rather than outdated or disproven information or pseudo-histories. If the most recent source an author has is from 60 years ago, you need to find someone who's done better research. You can look for people who acknowledge the ethnic, cultural, and religious diversity of the Old Norse people as proven by modern science. You can look for groups and individuals that self-identify as universalist, which means they believe that all religions have inherent value and that no religion is more true or more worthy than others. Universalist groups tend to be very open to other ideas, which is what you want from your religious community. You can also look for groups that encourage individual exploration and experimentation rather than pushing others to believe and practice the same way. And this has nothing to do with anything, but I really enjoyed it. It's a t-shirt from the clothing line Thor Hates Racists, and if you can't read this, it says, "Odin is the all-father, not the some-father." And finally, I have a list of safe, beginner-friendly heathen resources for people who want to investigate Norse paganism, but want to be sure that they're not accidentally taking in white nationalist rhetoric. First is Forn Cedar of America, which is a universalist and humanist Norse pagan group. Second is the book The Way of Fire and Ice by Ryan Smith, which is a beginner's guide that explicitly addresses the problem of the fascist creep in heathen spaces. Next is Circle Anzus, which is a heathen anarchist collective. They are not very active anymore, but their website does have really good information. We have Morgan Daimler, who is a non-binary author with excellent books on several Norse gods, as well as several books on Irish paganism. I've reviewed several of their books on this YouTube channel. Their work is excellent. We have Skald's Keep at skaldskeep.com, which is a heathen blog with a comprehensive beginner's guide to the religion. And North of Anwen at northofanwen.wixsite.com is another heathen blog who is very upfront about the problem with fascism and white nationalism in heathenry. And you can also check out my blog, The Illuminated Witch. I don't exclusively post heathen content, but that is my religion and I do talk about it. So in conclusion, there are no Nazis in Valhalla because Nazism and white nationalism is the opposite of what our gods stand for. It is an affront to our values of community, justice, fairness, and honor. And it is disgusting in the eyes of our gods, and it should be disgusting in the eyes of their followers. And these are my sources. You can pause the video if you want to read them. I will also copy and paste these in the video description. I do definitely recommend checking out the Welsh Viking videos that I reference here because he has some excellent discussions of this issue and the appropriation of Norse symbols by Nazis. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that this has made things a little bit more clear for you guys. Please let me know if you have any more questions, and I will do my best to answer them to the best of my ability. But for now, have a blessed and magical day. Bye.